Welcome back to the Wardrobe of Will. In today's video, we're going to be talking about all of the Lumineth Realmlords units and putting them in a tier list. So, you guys seem to enjoy the tier list videos that I've put up. They've been massively popular. So I thought might as well take one of the more popular factions and make a tier list for them. Before we get started, just a few bookkeeping notes. This is, of course, with all tier lists, very arbitrary. These are my personal opinions. I did talk to my top moderator on my Discord who plays Lumineth Realmlords fairly regularly and kind of asked him for his opinion. So, huge shout out to him. He was a wonderful help. Um, and yeah, this list is mostly kind of to line out what the most competitive units are. That's not to say the bottom tier units or the middle tier units can't shine or have their value somewhere. This is just kind of generally speaking what units you're going to get the most value out of. Um, yeah, so let's get started. On screen, you should be able to see all of the units that are going to be covered in this tier list. I have divided the whole tier list into 4 tiers. Tier 4 is the mostly useless tier, where I think you're going to have a really hard time getting any value out of the units in there. Tier 3 is a little bit kind of situational. They have value occasionally, but generally speaking should be avoided. Tier 2 is where units that I think you can build around or generally can include for fluff or flavor, and you will still have a fairly competitive list if that's what you are going for. And then tier 1 is, of course, the best of the best. The auto includes the stuff you're going to see in tournament winning lists. So without further ado, let's get started. So in tier 4, there's only 2 units in here, the Venari Bannerblade and then the Venari Blade Lord, or Blade Lords, excuse me. So why are these units down here? For starters, the Banner Blade doesn't provide any meaningful supportive abilities, and they don't have any good fighting capabilities. They don't really provide anything at all. The model and the banner looks really cool, but that's not really going to win you much. Um, this unit kind of feels like it should have been a um, add-on to either the Wardens or even the Blade Lords, how some units can, like 1 in 5 can carry a banner. This unit seems like it should have been that, and that they just tried to make that a whole new hero, and it just didn't work. So I really don't recommend taking this ever. Next up, I am sad to say it is the Venari Blade Lords. I love the Venari Blade Lords. I think their model is really cool and their rules are interesting and fun. Um, but they are expensive. They don't get sun metal weapons. So if you don't know, sun metal weapons are the Lumineth Realmlords, like mortal wounds on 6s or 5s if you have the power of Heish. Um, it's just kind of a shame because they're not coal models, they're cool models. And the stance changing ability that they have for choosing how to attack is really amazing. I think it's cool and very flavorful, but it's just poorly executed, I think. Next is tier 3. This is kind of where all of the lower to middle tier units are. You can definitely get value out of these guys if you really wanted to, but I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult than some of the units higher up. They either are overcosted, don't really have a good ability set or niche, and just generally I think there's better options. First up on this list is Eliana and Elithor. I think this model is very cool. I love the theme of it, but their niche is a little bit uh, hard to use. They get better as the battle goes on, but they are fairly expensive, and you might not be able to use them as easily as some other heroes. But I can definitely see some interesting play with this. It's a shame they don't get used very often, or at least from what I've seen in tournament lists or just kind of any battle reports. Um, but I think they definitely have some uses. You just got to figure out how to use them. Next is the Skinari Caligrave. So this guy I initially wanted to put somewhat towards tier 4. I think him and the Lore Seeker are a little bit weaker than tier 3, but after another evaluation, I think that they're barely in tier 3. The Caligrave is definitely higher than the Lore Seeker, though. They have an okay once per battle ability that, depending on how long the battle has been going on, the easier it is to go off. It basically lets you put down a uh, until the end of the game aura that buffs your other units, which is kind of nice. And their unique spell, it has a gimmick that just mathematically doesn't work. So how their spell works is you can target an enemy, I think it's within 18 inches, and you can either mark them for erasure or you can just do D3 damage to them. And so what does erasure do, you may ask? Well, erasure, it if you cast the spell on a unit that has the erasure mark, you deal D6 damage instead of D3. So it just mathematically doesn't work. Why would you spend one of your spell slots to mark somebody for the potential of doing more damage when you can just do more damage twice? So you are basically saying, would I rather have 2d3 or just 1d6? The 2d3 is going to give you a higher minimum and a generally higher average. So their spell just doesn't work. It's just kind of a slightly longer range arcane bolt that can do the d3 damage at range. Kind of meh. Next up is uh, Lurianor Olthorali. I'm not saying that right, but it's fine. This is the named Venari Lord Regent, and he is kind of just okay. He's not bad, he's just okay. He has alright melee abilities, and he fights better against chaos or demons, and he has an ability that is useful if you don't have techless. So he will help you generate command points if you are deciding to not do a techless build. So that's really a big incentive for him, as it lets you get more command abilities off and use your CP a little bit more liberally. But that's about it. Next is the Venari Lord Regent, and this is just kind of a weaker version of the named hero. But since it is not named, you get artifacts or command traits, so if that's something you're looking for. I think this unit is fine, it's just not as good as other units or the named variant. Next is the Venari Dawn Raiders. This is your default Lumineth melee cav. Again, they're just kind of okay. I think that overall they're fairly underwhelming. They don't have any rend and they're kind of easy to get rid of. If you've seen my Lumineth Realmlords battle line video, you'll know my thoughts on them. They're kind of, I think they underperform quite often. Next is the Lore Seeker. This guy has one use and one use only. You can deep strike him and deep strike him on an objective, and then he has a special rule that says, and as long as he's on that objective, and he's not near other friendly units, your opponent cannot control that objective. So it basically takes away objectives from your opponent and means they have to deal with him, which, albeit isn't very hard, it's more just annoying. It is powerful, and that's the only reason he's in tier 3, otherwise he's fairly useless, I think. Before we move on to tier 2 and tier 1, I would like to thank our Patreon supporters. These guys are great and awesome. They have definitely helped me expand my hobby and continue to upload videos. If you are interested in becoming a Patreon and getting access to special Discord channels and roles, as well as shoutouts on my videos, or some other unique perks that are in the higher tiers, I will leave a link in the description if you would like to help support me. Otherwise, I will also leave a link to my Discord in the description. It's a very fun community that has been growing very steadily. So if you enjoy my videos and just want another avenue to communicate with me and be part of my community, that'll be in the description. On to tier 2. These guys are amazing, and generally speaking, anything in tier 2 you should use or can use, but it's not necessarily an auto include. they can be built around if you like these specific units. First up is the Venari Wardens. They are really powerful as defensive units. They have good counterattack, and they're the only default battle line. Some should say that they would go in tier 1 because they're the only default battle line and you're kind of required to take them. But I think that just because they are necessary for other battle line choices, that they should still be evaluated on their merit alongside their requirements. Next up is the Star Shard Ballista. Now this one is a unique one. I think that the Star Shard Ballista is very underrated. It can dish out a lot of damage potentially, and it's very cheap for what it does. You can field 2 or 3 of these guys fairly comfortably and still have a lot of points to play with. I don't really know why you don't see these guys more often in higher tier lists. I mean, of course, there is just Sentinel spam, and that's probably why you don't see them. But if you don't like Sentinels or you don't want to run Sentinels to be against the meta, a Star Shard Ballista is a good alternative. It's definitely something I would consider. Next up is the Wind Chargers. Now these ones actually surprised me a little bit. They are probably the best cavalry option available to Lumineth. They are skirmish cav and they can really annoy the opponent. They're lightning fast and they have wonderful movement capabilities. And the fact that they have good range and melee capabilities allows them to fill a whole lot of different niches for your army. I think you could definitely build a list around wind chargers and other uh, wind themed units on this list. Somewhat an opposite to the wind chargers is the stone guard. They're tough and hard hitting, slow and elite, and they really need an army built around them. So whereas wind chargers, you can kind of include a unit and they'll do fine on their own. Stone Guard, I think you really need a themed stone army with like the Spirit of the Mountain or Avalanor or a Stone Mage and really build a whole army to support them. So they're great when you do that, and it's very fun to do that. I've seen some really interesting lists with that, but it's not something that you can just kind of pluck in and they'll perform at their top. You really need to kind of build around them. Next is the named Spirit of the Mountain, Avalanor. This guy is really interesting and he's really powerful, but like all of the stone themed armies, you kind of need everything. You need the Stone Guard, you need the Stone Mage, and you just kind of need to have a support structure built into your army for Avalanor and the Spirit of the Mountain. Uh, but that does not detract from their power. They are extremely powerful and they have a great supportive ability. They have an aura of -1 to hit around them, which is really strong, especially for the more tanky side of the Stone Guard and Spirit of the Mountain and all that jazz. So the Spirit of the Mountain, it's really hard to kind of say much about because it's the same things as Avalanor, just a little bit weaker. Um, I think the best part about this is because they are not named, you can give them command traits and artifacts, which is really powerful. Definitely something to keep in mind. Um, and they are a good support piece. So wind mages, really, I think they're only worthwhile in a heavy wind themed army with lots of wind chargers, and they're really fast and can annoy your opponent. They have lots of movement, and generally speaking, I think that the only reason they're up there, up this high, is because they support a really strong army build or a kind of a section of a strong army build. Next is the Stone Mage. The Stone Mage is somewhat vital to the functioning of a stone-themed army. They have a lot of abilities that helps a stone army, and they have a fantastic unique spell. Their unique spell really cripples uh, enemy movement and kind of prevents them from getting to where they need to go. It can really slow down the flow of your opponent. Now at the very tippy top, this is probably going to be no surprise to a lot of you, but the best unit in the Lumineth Realmlords roster are Venari Sentinels. These guys are insane. I think that it would be safe to argue you want as many Venari Sentinels as you can get your hands on, whether that be as many as 60 in a full army, just as many archers as you can get. You really want all of them, and that is because of their mortal wounds on fives or sixes if you have the spell off, and the not requiring line of sight, long range shooting. It's more or less a point and delete one enemy per turn. Most top tournament lists are going to revolve around Sentinels and Techless. So here is the man, the myth, the legend, Techless. I think Techless is fairly cheap for what he does. I'm kind of surprised he hasn't gotten any points increases over the past few balance passes. But regardless, he has great spell casting, great supporting and buffing abilities for everything to do with Lumineth. And honestly, I think Techless is almost an auto include. It's really difficult to make a list without Techless. I'm not saying it's impossible, but you're really handicapping yourself by not including Techless. Next up is the Cathalar. So the Cathalar is really, really strong. Their unique spell basically takes the whole gimmick of Be'lakor and lets you do it multiple times, or like once per turn, really. What their unique spell is you can pick a unit within 18 inches, and you roll 2d6 every time that unit tries to do something. Um, and if you roll higher than their bravery, they cannot do that thing. Um, it's crippling, especially for low bravery armies. And also, their emotional transference lets you ignore battle shock and destroy another enemy in battle shock. Um, that really, really hurts. And they're cheap, and I would say that this is as close as auto include besides the Sentinels. Next is Sevireth. Sevireth is an interesting one, and that is just because they are insanely mobile. You can more or less zoom around the map many, many times over the course of a game. Enemies cannot reasonably catch Sevireth, and they do a lot of damage, both in melee and at ranged. They're just flexible and just really, really fast. And same thing for the Spirit of the Wind. Really, you're not losing too much when you go for Sevireth or the Spirit of the Wind. Sevireth is a little bit more powerful just because of they're named, but I'd say that the Spirit of the Wind is on par with Sevireth. Definitely something that you can build around. Um, I've seen some army lists going around with Sevireth and then 3 or 4 Spirits of the Wind, and it's definitely an interesting, different way to play. Last but not least is the Light of Eltharion. I'd say that Eltharion is very powerful, probably bottom of tier 1, top of tier 2. He's really just an amazing combat hero. I've kind of heard him compared to a mini Gotrek, where of course he's not Gotrek. He's not going to do as much as Gotrek, but he's still very strong as a combat piece. Definitely something to consider. And also, if you're a lorehound, it's a fun unit as well, considering Eltharion or the essence of Eltharion came from the old world or the world that was. So, just kind of a neat little unit, I'd say. That was all of the Lumineth Realmlords units. If you disagree with my ratings or have some other different ideas, please leave them down in the comments below. That is one of my favorite parts of these videos, is that they are discussion pieces and allow to kind of facilitate different thoughts on how different units function. If you like this video, please leave a like or a comment, and if you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. This has been the Warg of Woe, and I'll talk to you guys next time.